I'm beginning my talk on the four worlds. I was going to look around for a suitable diagram, but I actually invited you in my Shabbat thought to do your own research. So hopefully you all can look up the word four worlds, look for an image, and find one that suits you. Very briefly, many little elements to my teaching tonight, but very briefly, uh, the three worlds of the four worlds, meaning Bria, creation, Yetzirah, formation, and Asiyah, the world of action. There's a precedent in the Bible. There's a biblical verse. The first word of the four worlds, Atzilut, which means emanation, was brought in by the medieval Jewish poet Ibn Gabirol, who wrote a poem called Mikor Chaim, Fons Vitae, the source of life or the well of life. And the poem existed, and people didn't know that Solomon ibn Gabirol, it's an Arabic name, was Jewish, and it was later discovered that he was, and therefore he's notable as a Neoplatonist, but not a Kabbalist. And that reminds us that Neoplatonism is an ancient tradition and an ancient Jewish tradition that helped create the Kabbalah, but not all Neoplatonists became Kabbalists. So a quick word about Neoplatonism, and you even find it perhaps in our Torah portion today. So if you remember anything about Plato, especially in his several dialogues, I have a project to read all of the Platonic dialogues and study them very carefully over the next few years. I'm in the Theaetetus, which is one of the dialogues where he mentions this perceiving metaphysical reality, that there's a reality that generates our reality. And the simplest analogy I oftentimes give is even if one does not believe in a metaphysical world, but let's say you hear about a trial and you know that it wasn't just, meaning it was law, but not just. In Hebrew, we would say mishpat tzedek. The mishpat can mean just or justice, but tzedek means righteous justice. So even in the Bible, you have the idea that the courts can get it wrong. And so if the courts have gotten it wrong and you're not a legal scholar, how do you know when the courts decide unjustly? How do you know, for example, when someone talks about love and you realize, that's actually not really love? Because as I spoke about many times in my virtue classes, sometimes love is not beneficent, it's not caring, it's not other regarding. For some people, the idea of in love means claiming another person and letting them do what they have to do for you. So if a person describes that to me, I'll say, I know we use the word love. It's a pretty lower level concept of love, but there's a higher concept of love where your first thought is not now that I love you, here's what you must do, but now that I love you, how can I care for you? Now, the word love can be used in both, but somehow we know there's a higher order and a lower order of the word. And I would include love, justice, truth, and beauty. But especially in justice, if you think that something is right or wrong, regardless of the law of the land might say that something is permitted when it shouldn't be permitted. For example, slavery. Some people say our morals are part of a social construction of reality, that our morals come from society. Well, that's obviously not true, because how would society ever change? I mean, how did people know that even though it was legal, it was immoral? So our morals don't come from society. Our morals help critique society. Our morals help our societies move into the future. Sometimes we make mistakes, but people of conscience are always looking at the world and saying, here's what the world is, and I have a moral sense of what it could be. Now, we all have different visions of what it could be. That's why we have democracy. We talk things out and we vote. And, over time, maybe too much time, we start to figure it out. So any person who can say, yes, that's law, but it's not just. Yes, that was what society thinks, but society is wrong. Anytime you think something like that, you have a standard by which you are assessing this world. So that would be a very simple understanding of Platonism. There's another world that's not the physical world. It's not the world that you see. It's not the world of what people do. There's something that allows you to critique the world you're living in. Now, I and many others use the word conscience to that spiritual faculty by which we can perceive the real world of justice and assess this world of justice. We call that the conscience. Some folks call it the moral faculty. So there are many terms for this. And by the way, one of the benefits of studying Plato is so many of the Platonic dialogues are trying to figure out the question that I'm always asked when I talk about this with people, and I say, uh, I'm a moral realist. Therefore, I believe there are better and worse answers to moral questions as a matter of our being, of our human nature. And I'll call that an ontological claim, meaning just the nature of being. And someone says, "How do you know?" And I say, "Well, that's an epistemological question." So I'm not going to go try to find out what it is if I don't believe that it exists. So I say to people, I don't want to go into the epistemological, meaning how we know, unless you agree there's something to search for. And once we agree there's something to search for, they say, "Well, I don't believe in the metaphysical world." I said, "Then why bother with epistemology? Let's just drop it right there." So many of the Platonic dialogues are focused exactly on this question. How do we know of the metaphysical world? And one day I'll take you through one of these, a few of these dialogues. Oh, by the way, I was refreshed to know that the German theologian that I'm immersed in right now, Friedrich Schleiermacher, by the way, who could have written the inscription that Shanti just read. Um, uh, some sentences that I've read the past couple of weeks are almost eerily identical. For example, the idea that we build stone bridges to the infinite, and then there's a moment when our stone bridges fall away and the infinite comes to us. Well, he has this idea that that all religion beyond religion, ideally is obsessed with the infinite. And therefore, everything we do, everything we read, while we are building our edifices of holiness, there's a certain moment when you're let's say you're building your temple of holiness. You're reading Torah and you're reading Psalms and you're observing a ritual, and suddenly your holy temple just becomes filled with divine light. And what you realize is in your religious practice, which for me is mostly a study practice, and I very much enjoy my study practice. But let's say in all the things that I do, I'm building a temple, I'm building a Mishkan. And then one day, as we see in the Torah portion Shmini, where the Mishkan works and the overwhelming what they call kavod Adonai, the overwhelming manifestation glory of the divine pours in, and everybody just falls on their faces and starts to say hallelujah, something like that. So that happens. The interesting thing is, I think if you do not have a spiritual practice, it's rather random. However, if you do have a spiritual practice and you know that everything you study, everything you do, you're building your Mishkan, but you know in the back of your mind, there's a moment when the holy light will shine through and your Mishkan, what you are building, suddenly doesn't matter because the divine light has shown in. So Schleiermacher has this idea. Well, not surprisingly, Schleiermacher, who is a German pastor, theologian, was also a Plato scholar. In fact, one of the standard translations of Plato was written by Schleiermacher, translated into English. So the more I study this theologian, the more I feel a kinship with a person that I knew about in college because I had to distinguish between Schopenhauer and Schleiermacher. That's all I knew. Schopenhauer's this, Schleiermacher's this. I never really studied. Well, now I'm studying it. And since I'm studying with a German student, I finally got the German version on Kindle, so I'm going to be going into the quite difficult German of Schleiermacher. And I have to say, I mean, he's wordy, he's verbose. From a 21st century perspective, he did need an editor. Uh, I'm learning. Don't write so complex, man. Just like get to it. But it's really a really fantastic journey. So if you're interested, he's on Kindle. The Cambridge translation is very good. Just read super slow, 2 pages a day, because he's not easy to penetrate, but it's worthwhile. All right. That being said, I'm already implying that the Platonic idea of, let's say, a higher reality, let's say a more real reality, and then our reality. Well, when rabbinic Judaism develops, this idea, I don't want to call it Neoplatonic because it's also a rabbinic idea. You find it in Islam as well. I don't think some rabbis knew Plato, but I wouldn't say it was well known. So I think for some religious people, it's just obvious. It's not something you have to read somewhere else. So, for example, in the Midrash, the Midrashic idea of Torah, which you may have heard me talk about, they say the Torah we have is a novellet, the unripe fruit of Chokhmah Shelmala. So there's something called the upper wisdom. Our Torah is just a miniature, unripe version of the upper wisdom. You find in Midrash Rabbah also that there's something called a wisdom, Chokhmah, which God looks into as a blueprint to create the world. So Chokhmah is the blueprint of reality that the divine studies in order to create our world. And this is from Proverbs chapter 8, where Chokhmah has a speech and she says, I preceded everything. I was with God at the beginning. Well, the rabbis thought about that and says, well, it says in Proverbs that she was with God in the beginning. Well, what was she? She wrote the blueprints. Um, and so this idea that God and the blueprints from Chokhmah somehow coexisted at some, pre-eternal time, and out of that the world comes. So the rabbis had these ideas that there's this reality, there's this Torah, but there's also an upper Torah. There's the Torah before the Torah. Using Tillish's ideas, there's the God before God, religion before religion. So this is a rabbinic idea. When they take this verse, if I'm not mistaken, from Ezekiel, and by the way, also with the creation story that we find in our Birkot HaShachar, the early morning blessings, where God says, out the soul, El Hai Neshama Shenatat Torah, Ata Brata, you created it, Ata Yitzarta, you formed it, Ata Nafachta Bi, and you blew it into me. So this is taking a line of liturgy, the Elohai Neshama in the early morning blessings, from the biblical story of the creation of Adam in Genesis chapter 2. So think of this idea, ata brata, bara is a word only used with God to create something new, some new form. So you created it. Ata yitzarta, you shaped it. Vata nafachtabi, and you blew it into me. So just try to imagine that your soul is created by the divine. Your soul has a shape within the divine, and then the divine bestows the soul upon you. Now, I'm not making a theological claim. It's more of a meditative kind of a claim. And as I shared with you, I divide the prayer book into the daily service into 6 sections, and each day I do one section, Sunday, Monday, etc. So Sunday is my Birkot HaShachar day, and even there I only pick 1 or 2 of the brachot. I'd rather say 1 or 2 blessings with complete intention than get inundated with too many words. And of the several prayers that are my go-to for Sunday, one of them is Elohai Neshama, just this meditation. Ata brata, you created it. Ata yitzarta, you shaped it. Ata nafachta bi, and you blew it into me. And there's this wonderful meditation I heard in a New Age circle. It's one of the best things I took from it, which is it's a little bit trite, but it's meaningful. When I breathe in, God is breathing out. When I breathe out, God is breathing in. It's a wonderful, wonderful little meditation. Okay, so this idea that there's a world of Bria, of creation, a world of Yitzira, a world of formation, a world of Asiya, a world of action. So we live in the world of action, the world of doing things. And of course, the problem is the world of doing things seems the most real. And we can get mesmerized, we can be hypnotized by the world of doing. So part of what spiritual psychology is, and this is I'll be giving a series of talks trying to really organize the idea of spiritual psychology. I want to actually write a curriculum about it and maybe create a class on it, maybe a short book at some point. I've lots of thoughts about spiritual psychology. I've never really organized it in some kind of order. So this would be an introduction to spiritual psychology, that the world of Asiya is not the only world. Okay, so you might say above that, here I'm borrowing from many, many sources. Right now, what's on my mind is the words of Immanuel Kant in his very difficult critique of pure reason. And in that book, he's thinking about human mentality and how there's already a word structured before you even, let's say, see the world. This is called phenomenology, which means we don't see the world as it is. We see the world through a lens, the structure of consciousness. I haven't read the book. I've read a few pages, but I've read outlines of the book, and it's profound. I mean, when he tries to talk about the structure of consciousness, if I'm not mistaken, he has 17 different structures of consciousness that come with the operating system. They're hardwired in. So whenever you look at the world, it's already there. By the way, this idea is preceded by both Aristotle and Plato, but Kant did more than anybody in launching the idea that we see phenomena through the structures of consciousness that actually interpret the world for us. So they call this phenomenology to remind us that we are seeing phenomena translated through consciousness. So when I think of the word Yitzira, I think of many things, but especially the Kantian idea of phenomenology. And our consciousness is structured, and therefore the world comes to us mediated by these structures. So it makes me think about the structures of my consciousness. Now, not just the Kantian structures of a consciousness, which he would claim that every person who can think have, but I think of all other structures of consciousness, especially structures of consciousness that are not within our being, but rather you might say narratives by which we interpret the world that actually are destructive. So many people say, we see the world through narratives. We see the world through our own structures, which is true. I haven't read many people saying, and some of these you can change. Now, how do you know when you should change a structure of consciousness? Right. So how do I know when I should change a structure of consciousness? My question is, what's it doing to my thoughts, feelings, and emotions? Is it a structure of consciousness that produces hatred? Is it a structure of consciousness that produces resentment? Is it a structure that produces fear, victimhood? So a lot of what's going on with the Middle East today, and I'm very sad to say, I see some of my Facebook quote unquote friends, have taken on the propaganda, the awful propaganda about the so-called genocide. It doesn't even dignify response because all of you can do a tiny bit of research and expose this idea. It's simply anti-Israel and maybe even anti-Semitic propaganda. All all you have to do is ask where is the data coming from Hamas. Also, there's an article you can search for this. Hamas has revised all of its casualty figures because some groups actually gone in and said, you know, the, the world's going to know it's all a lie. Well, they've revised everything. That some 80% of their casualties are men of fighting age. They used to say mostly women and children. So even some ministry in Gaza, which is not controlled by Hamas, has published revised casualty figures. You can actually look this up. So they're even saying it mostly seems to be uh, um, men of military age who have died. And then we also know that civilians were weaponized, they put their armaments in schools, in mosques, and so forth. And there, of course, there's what happens when you lead your people into a war and you have an incredible tunnel system, but you don't let your people use them as bomb shelters. So we all know that Hamas weaponizes civilian casualties. This is nothing new. We all know this. Some people don't know it. Why don't they know it? Because they have a structure in the way they see the world that stops them from knowing it because some kind of political allegiance. Now, I understand that one of the ways we see the world is through our kinship allegiances, our political allegiances, but that's a low level of consciousness. So my politics have changed, and I remember my perception of the world changing when my politics began to change. I said, wow, I saw the world through a political bias, a lot of it rooted in hatred. And part of my growing up was to say, well, okay, so I think I understood the world in a bad way. It was not accurate, and it was one rooted in hatred. So from now on, the rest of my life, whenever I have a political belief, I'll really try to make sure it is rooted in knowledge, meaning as much empirical evidence as I can find. Number two, and sound theories. And how do you test a theory? Find someone who disagrees with you. And I can say, let me run my theory by you. I had this experience yesterday. I have a group I meet with every Friday, and there was a guy pretty much on the Israeli left, and I was running ideas by him, and he held his ground, but he tested theories, and I had answers. He says, "Well, you really have answers," and we both benefited from the discussion. Neither of us got angry, and he said, "So are you Likud?" I said, I belong to the political party. I'm blowing my own horn a little bit of truth and reason, which means show me the platform and I'll tell you if I like the party. I don't, I say, I like the way Netanyahu is managing the war, but will I join the Likud party? I don't know. I haven't read their platform. When Naftali Bennett runs to be prime minister, which he probably will in 2028, I'll read his platform. So I said to him, I have to read a platform, see if it makes sense, but mainly I want to look at evidence, factual, empirical evidence as much as I can. From that, develop good theories. And from that, decide what political thought I have. And then find someone who disagrees with me to strength test the nature of my thought. I've recommended this to you for many, many years, and I still do. So, this idea that we have a yitzira, a structure of our thoughts that you might say are presented to us, and we don't think about them because they're part of our identity. We belong to political parties and different groups, and our identities are formed around it. And then one time we have to ask yourself, will I sacrifice my political identity for the truth? Some people don't want to because all their friends are in a different political party, and their friends are more important than this obscure idea of the truth. And there are others that say, look, I don't have to tell my friends what I think, but I definitely am not going to think what they think just because they think it. I can be an independent thinker and also keep my friends by keeping my mouth shut. There is some prudence to not saying everything that you think. So think of the word yitzira as the structure of thought in perhaps the Kantian sense of the structures of perception. And then also in the sense that we have structures that are malleable, maybe not rooted in truth, maybe rooted in truth, and maybe not rooted in truth. By the way, I think another structure of thought is engaging in the arts. Many people don't know how to read a poem. Many people don't know how to read literature. They don't know how to watch a movie that you and I might watch and say is great art, but they don't see it because they don't have a structure of thought that allows them to appreciate art. I would say the same thing with religion and God. Some people in the world of action, I heard another clip of Sam Harris. He hates religion because it balkanizes the world. And I say, so you're against balkanization of the world, not really. I wanted to say this time, not really religion. What if religion creates different holy communities that understand love, justice, truth, and beauty in different ways and live in peace with each other? Are you against that? So I can't query him when I'm listening to him on YouTube. But this idea that the balkanization of the world is because of religion, I think is more nationalism, to tell you the truth. Not all nationalism is rooted in religion. Religion has a part of it, but I think it's also ethnicity. So that's a different thing. I think the fracturing of balkanization is about nationalism as much as it is about religion. And then you could critique nationalism. So when I look at what people believe, what people think, there's a structure of thought of how they see the world. For example, hate religion or say it's another way that human beings organize themselves, and let me see if this benefits them and if it benefits other people. Some religious movements have greatly benefited reality. For example, the role of the Catholic Church in bringing down Poland, I think, and eventually communism, the role of the Catholic Church in bringing down Marcos in the Philippines, and so forth. So your opinions, your beliefs, your politics all have a structure, and then we should actually examine the structure and ask us if it's leading to something called truth. Now the question is, by what are we examining the structure of Yetzirah? Now, therefore, there's some criterion, even for Yetzirah. I mean, even for Kant to write, critique of pure reason, he must have gone to a point of consciousness where he could see the structures of human thought and perception. So that's the world of Bria. Now, Bria is understood mostly to be silent, which means when I meditate into Bria, I'm no longer meditating into words. I'm meditating into a pre-verbal, pre-conceptual reality. You might call this a highly spiritual or mystical experience. It's a non-verbal world of truth by which I can assess the world of Yetzirah and the world of Asiyah. So you might say it's the blueprint of reality, as is mentioned in the Midrash Rabbah. So now we have Asiyah, the world of action, the world where we live, and the beliefs we carry around, the ideas that we haven't really examined very carefully. Yetzirah, formation. Bria, creation. We might call this the blueprint of reality. And then above that is Atzilut. Now, Shlomo Ibn Gabirol added Atzilut to Asiya, let's say action, Yetzirah, formation, uh, Bria, creation. He was the one that put Atzilut on the top. Atzilut means, Lahatzil means, is used metaphysically to mean to emanate. So in Kabbalah, it's God emanating the light of the Ein Sof into the into the halal, into the vacuum from creation. But remember, Ibn Gabirol was not a Kabbalist. He was more of a straight up Neoplatonist. That reality is emanated from the mind of God into metaphysical realities such as love, justice, truth, beauty, the good, the holy, etc. And then our world, you might say, is at the bottom level, and we have only a hazy understanding of what love truly is, and justice truly is, and beauty truly is. So even when a person writes a poem or makes a beautiful painting, I had the great fortune of being around two great creators, both Leonard Cohen and David Mamet, and each would say to me, people say to me, "Where do you get your ideas?" And they both said something, "I don't know, and if I knew, I'd go there more often." So Leonard would often say, "I don't write my poems. My poems are written through me." So he would have a sense of being, kind of enraptured by the muse of poetry, and he would just, kind of defer to it. You might sharpen it up, tighten it up, and of course he's coming through Leonard's personality, but he also felt that here he is in the world of action, and there's another world floating above him that would use him as a channel. Oh, by the way, I want to say, when I first met Leonard, he was rather a kind of a dour Sabbatean. That God put us in a box in which we don't fit, and the world crushes us and chafes us. And a Gnostic, and I'm more Neoplatonic, and that was our lifelong conversation, was Gnostic, Neoplatonic. And you say, you really think that there's a divine light that shines in, and we don't live in this reality that mangles us? I said, yeah, there's a little bit of mangling, but so, but he lived in this idea that something, comes down, especially with gifted people and anybody who reads poetry, anybody who loves the idea that you read poetry and you're ushered into another reality. So try to imagine, and you can again do your research. I'm interpreting this world from a spiritual psychology, meaning how it affects human beings. If you look at the original sources on this, it's about God and the Sphirot. I'm putting that aside. I'm interested in spiritual psychology, meaning the psyche of human beings, and asking whether four world theory helps us understand our psyches. It doesn't define our psyches, but it helps us think about our psyches. That we live in the world of Asiya, and our experience of Asiya is shaped by Yitzirah, structures of consciousness on one hand, and structures of thought on the others. The second being malleable, which means if it's not producing um, goodness in us, maybe we can shift it around as long as it matches reality enough that we're not going to bump into tables in the dark. There might be better ways of seeing the world. And then above that is Bria. This is more mystical, the blueprint of reality. And finally, Atzilut, moving into the to the primal moment. This would be like the Kabbalistic emanation of the light in Atzilut. So look this up, play with it, use it for your meditations. What I want to add in thinking about depth work is there's also four worlds coming up from the depths. And this is one of the ways that I distinguish between spirit and soul. It's not a dictionary definition, but I just know that I have two different, very different senses of the divine. I call one spirit, where I am ascending the ladder of consciousness. For example, observer mind, objective mind, rational mind, truth mind, love, justice, truth, and beauty, the good, the holy, the mind of God, the divine, that I'm ascending up a ladder of consciousness. So, for better or for worse, I call that spirit. And I call soul taking that same journey, but reversing the ladder and going down into the realm of the soul. So here I'm living in the world of asiya, meaning just walking around, not assuming that the way I experience the world is produced from the unconscious. Now, not entirely, but in some good measure. And then if I go down into, again, I've never taught this before, so it's going to be rough, that there is a structure of the world, let's say a narrative of the world, my habits of seeing the world, you might say the yitzira of the unconscious. Now, most of my wisdom work is really about the yitzira of unconscious, the habits we have that produce anger and resentment and defensiveness and victimhood and envy and so forth. Those are structures of what Assagioli would call the plastic unconscious. I call the unconscious ego self. Well, it's a structure. It's real. However, an enlightened human being could look at how they think, how they feel, how they emote, how they speak, and something says to them, this is wrong. I mean, yeah, it's there. It produces my behavior, but it's not good, right? And obviously, we go here to the idea of Bria. We have something in us that is able to assess us that is beyond the you now. There's who we are, and there's, you might say, a faculty of assessment, a faculty of observation. We can say, that's who I am, but I'm not enough on every level, spiritually, poetically, behaviorally, the way the inner life operates. So a lot of my wisdom work would be in the world of the yitzira, the formation of the inner life. So now Bria, you might say, is the deeply meditative place that I go in order to assess not just my behavior, but the structure that produces my behavior. And this is a very deep thing. I teach the techniques of wisdom work, how to change your yitzira, as it were. But at a more advanced level, there's a place we have to go to, a very deep place, and examine our values and ask ourselves, do we live by our values? So our value, from my mind, values come from the soul. So I would say the Bria level of soul, which means my values critique my unconscious ego self. If I have the values of love, justice, truth, and beauty, and then I look how my unconscious ego self operates, I can say my unconscious ego self is not operating by my values. Well, that's the world of Bria. So Bria would be the world of values. That's a very complex idea. I'll talk about it more at some time. But I think values is a knowledge of the soul. Again, I don't think we take our values in from society, because I think some values that are in society are really horrible values. So my values, are something more connected to the depth of the soul, which is which is the source. Now, I'm not saying we're not in conversation. I'm not saying my values as they are intact, but I know that my values in a way assess my structure of the unconscious ego self. And part of what soul work is going deep into the world of Bria, the source of your values. And it can be a very spiritual and mystical experience to sink from asiya, your conscious mind, yitzira, examining your unconscious ego self, into the world of Bria, examine your core fundamental values by which you might assess your unconscious ego self, and eventually into the world of Atzilut. In this, I see, I've described this many times, where I see, kind of at the bottom of the soul, a fountain of living water or holy light trying to emanate itself up into consciousness. And one reason people don't feel connected is because there's debris over this well. And sometimes when I'm not feeling the light, I'm not feeling the holy water, I have this meditation where I go deeper and deeper and deeper into the soul. And here's where I use images. So here's where we see that the natural language of the soul is poetry, is metaphors, is images. Says the one that I gave you. The fountain is being blocked by the debris of consciousness. And sometimes when I meditate, I can actually go down into the chamber of the fountain of living water. And I could go in there and I can look at the debris and I can get a sense of, where this debris came from, what kind of crises and traumas and kind of leftover stuff from my life has just descended into and blocks the fountain. And I do this kind of metaphoric work of being able to name the debris and to move it aside, and all of a sudden the water just wells up, and and then I can feel it go through Bria, Yitzira, consciousness, and I feel just deeply connected with this holy light, this holy water that is flowing in from the soul. With spirit, I feel a much more benign, veiled light coming down. With soul, I feel a welling up within me. Now, in this world of images, the last thing I want to say tonight before I take any questions, um, is also I think there's a shadow side of it, which is connected to human creativity. So where do I see this? Mostly in the Jewish tradition. If, for example, the book of Enoch, third Enoch, should be considered a Jewish source, and it is a Jewish source. It's just been banished from the tradition. It's one of the banished texts. Third Enoch. Well, when I first studied third Enoch many years ago, it's a horrifying, frightening text. So when you get into the early texts of Jewish Gnosticism, you can see why they have been banished, because it's horror literature, but it's there. So when I read Third Enoch back when I was studying the foundations of Jewish mysticism in the 1980s, I was also studying. I'd been introduced to Rilke, and when I read the first of the Duino elegies, and I had Third Enoch nearby. Um, Again, I didn't think about it very much then, other than, oh, Rilke's great. Book of Hours I love. Duino elegies is harder, and Enoch I didn't really connect it, and I've much more connected it now, because I have a theory that down in the world of the soul, there's a shadow world, where tragedy comes from, where horror stories come from. There's a part of us that understands it. So what I wanted to do, let me see if I can pull this off. You'll just give me a second. Just put the beginning of one of the Duino elegies on my screen. Hold on a second. Here we go. I'm going to share this with you. I was the right one. Okay. Um, so I went to a website called Duino Elegies. So here's a sculpture that the website has decided to place in. Wow, isn't that incredible? Just the sculpture. So here you see it's a website, uh, Rainier Marie Rilke, Duino Elegies. Incredible artwork. Uh, each elegy uh, has its own sculpture. Isn't this incredible what this person has done? Um, so we're going to go back to the first elegy. So why am I reading this to you? Because when I apply four worlds to the soul, Asiya, our day-to-day consciousness, Yetzirah, structures of consciousness, Bria, the creation of consciousness, Atzilut, the divine point of consciousness, I realize there's a part of the soul which is not so benign. It's where the book of Third Enoch comes. It's a book of horror, but it's real. It's there. And I think I told you the my um a counseling session I had many years ago of a young woman who had terrible writer's block. And I said to her, I feel there's an a, a terrible angel of beauty that's preventing you. She says, well, I don't believe in angels. I said, for a while, believe in angels. We went and studied this. Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angelic orders? And even if one were to suddenly take me to its heart, I would vanish into a stronger existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror that we are still able to bear, and we revere it so because it calmly disdains to destroy us. Every angel is terror. And so I hold myself back and swallow the cry of a darkened sobbing. Ah, who then can we make use of? Not angels, not men. And the resourceful creatures see clearly that we are not really at home in the interpreted world. Perhaps there remains some tree on a slope that we can see again each day. There remains to us yesterday's street, the thinned out loyalty of a habit that liked us, and so stayed and never departed. Oh, and the night, when the wind full of space wears out our faces, whom would not she stay for the longed for, gentle, disappointing one, whom the solitary heart with difficulty stands before? Is she less heavy for her lovers? Ah, they only hide their fate between themselves. Did you not know yet? Throw the emptiness out of your arms to add to the spaces we breathe. Maybe the birds will feel the expansion of air in more intimate flight. And he goes on and on and on. When I first uh, began to read Duino elegies, it was almost unbearable. I read it quickly on the outside. You can see it. You go into each line and you go on a journey of his experience writing the poem. It really is unbearable. Well, I felt the same thing when I studied Third Enoch. I don't read it from the outside. I try to go inside the mind of the author who's producing this in the same way. The books of Enoch are unbearable to read. I think, but the author is saying, please bear with me. I mean, literally, like I'm bearing this burden of this horror within me. And I wanted to put it into words so that you, the reader, can bear it with me. So why do we want to read the Duino elegies? Well, when I had this young woman read it, that that my interpretation was she has beautiful poetry to write, but a terrible angel of beauty was stopping her. It was terrifying her. And we talked through about how to fight angels. And she said, look, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in angels. And you're telling me how to fight angels. I said, we're going to fight this angel because this angel is terrifying you. Now, it was a guess on my part. It was a sense. And we actually broke through. I mean, she broke through and the terrifying angel became, you know, part of the resources of her writing. So Duino Elegies is, a wonderful text, almost unbearable if you're going to read it slowly and deeply, but that's an authentic mode of the soul. So the last thing I wanted to say tonight when I talk about the four worlds of depth, it's not benign. Soul work can be terrifying when you start to try to map out the shadow. That's where terror comes from. That's where horror movies come from. And it is an authentic and real part of the soul. Jung would say, to the degree that you suppress the shadow, you empower the shadow to work in darkness and symptomize. So many people have images and fantasies that they're ashamed of, and therefore they don't want to go down and examine these terrible angels. They push it aside. Therefore, they symptomize this. And Jung would say, you have to know the gods pulsing through you, even the horrible angels, even the terrifying angels, because if you don't, they take their revenge eventually. Now, I don't know if this is true, but I read Jung at a young age with a wonderful study partner. And part of what we did was, in an unafraid way, map out the world of fantasy, even the horrible, terrifying world of fantasy, because it's there. And from that, understand, not only, let's say, the more beautiful levels of soul searching into into the origins of the soul, but even the shadow part, and try to figure out what does the human shadow have to do with the soul? What does the human shadow have to do with human consciousness? Well, that's an unending question for me. But I wanted to share with you tonight that four world theory for me both is a theory of ascension through spirit and descending into soul and descending into the shadow. All right, uh, that's my talk for tonight.